Ancient Egypt is famous for its magnificent pyramids, intricate inscriptions, and enthralling mythology. It did, however, have certain unusual practices and ceremonies that appear horrendous by modern standards. Ancient Egyptians had a distinct way of life that was both interesting and terrifying, from skin carving to body preservation. In this video, we will reveal the 15 most horrific things that were common in ancient Egypt. Number 15. Sacred animals. Animals were cherished and respected in ancient Egyptian civilization. They were regarded as significant elements of religious and cultural traditions. Many animals were associated with individual gods or goddesses, and cults were dedicated to them across Egypt. These cults worshipped a wide range of animals, from ferocious crocodiles and lions to peaceful cats and birds. While this may appear strange to us today, it can help us comprehend ancient Egyptian ideas and values. Temples dedicated to certain deities were common in several of these cults. Devotees would bring gifts and perform ceremonies in respect of these animals, which were often considered embodiments or representations of the gods. For instance, the god Ptah, who was honored in Memphis, was connected to the Apis bull, while the crocodile god Sobek was venerated in the city of Crocodilopolis. Ritual killings were an essential part of sacred animal cults in ancient Egypt. Animals were carefully chosen and raised to be offered as sacrifices to the gods. This was believed to please the gods, provide security, and bring wealth to the people. Animals were often decorated with precious jewelry or other ornaments, cared for with great reverence, and ritually cleansed before being sacrificed. Their bodies were usually preserved and buried in a holy graveyard after the ritual. In some places, huge quantities of preserved animals have been discovered in burial grounds, showing the extent and significance of this practice in ancient Egyptian society. Number 14. Cannibalism. The issue of cannibalism in ancient Egyptian society caused much controversy and curiosity among historians and archaeologists. Although there is some evidence that suggests such practices existed, it is uncertain whether they were rare or widespread in that culture. Some writings from that time, such as the pyramid texts, have passages that seem to imply cannibalism. For instance, the cannibal hymn found in the tomb of Pharaoh Unas says how the king eats parts of the gods' bodies to gain their divine power. However, most scholars agree that these writings should be interpreted symbolically rather than as a factual account of cannibalism cases. They rather express a wish to attain divine power and everlasting life than an actual practice of eating human flesh. However, there is also little archaeological evidence that may indicate cases of cannibalism in ancient Egypt. Human bones have been found in several locations with marks of cutting and beheading, which could suggest such practice. However, the evidence is not conclusive, and it is hard to tell whether these findings represent occasional cases, ritual acts, or the outcome of hunger or other extreme situations. Number 13. Ritual practices. The afterlife was a vital part of the culture and religion of ancient Egypt, and funerary texts were necessary for the ritual preparation for the journey after death. These texts, often inscribed on tomb walls, papyrus scrolls, or other burial objects, were designed to provide the deceased with directions and protection as they traverse the intricate and potentially hazardous realm of the afterlife. Several types of funerary texts were used throughout the history of ancient Egypt, including the pyramid texts, coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead. These contained a collection of spells, prayers, and rituals designed to help the deceased overcome various difficulties they might encounter in the afterlife. These texts addressed such issues as the judgment before the god Osiris, where the deceased's heart was weighed on the scales of truth, or the risky journey through the underworld. The spells in the funerary texts were often very specific, addressing personal issues or potential dangers. For instance, spells could ensure the deceased access to food and water, protect them from evil spirits, or give them the ability to transform into various creatures to facilitate their journey. The text also contained instructions on proper conduct and actions that the deceased should perform to gain favor with the gods and secure a place in eternal happiness. Number 12. Sibling marriages. Incestuous marriages, notably between pharaohs and their siblings, were a prominent feature of ancient Egyptian civilization that may appear exceedingly objectionable to today. They were, nevertheless, an essential component of ancient Egypt's social, political, and religious life, and played distinct functions in the complicated environment. To understand why such partnerships were deemed acceptable, if not required, it is necessary to look at the cultural and ideological reasons for this practice. Pharaohs were revered as celestial creatures as rulers of ancient Egypt, originating from the gods themselves. The ancient Egyptians believed that they were descended from the gods and that their rulers were the living embodiments of divine power. To uphold the cosmic order of the universe, known as Mayat, they had to keep their bloodline pure and sacred. That is why they often married their own siblings, who shared their divine heritage. This also helped them to secure their political power, as they could avoid conflicts and alliances with other families. By marrying their brothers or sisters, they followed the example of the god and goddess, Isis and Osiris, who were the most revered couple in Egyptian mythology. In this way, they reinforced their godlike status and strengthened their power. Marriage was a serious matter in ancient Egypt, as it was in other ancient cultures. Aside from the theocracy, the family was the most valuable institution in social life. In general, ancient Egyptians married within their social classes. The male was typically married between the ages of 16 and 20, or as soon as he chose a potential craft in order to support his family. Women typically marry shortly after puberty. It was fairly uncommon for an elderly guy to marry a young girl. Marriage and betrothal ceremonies in ancient Egypt differed from those in modern times. The upper class would typically create a contract between the husband and father of the bride regarding their property. The marriage contract included the date of the pharaoh's reign, as well as the names of the wife and husband and their parents. There was also the occupation of the husband and wife within the names. At the end of the contract, the scribe additionally signs the names of the marriage witnesses, and finally, the name of the settlement to which they belong. Marriages in the Egyptian royal house were celebrated with much pomp and circumstance. Pharaoh frequently married multiple women or foreign princesses for political purposes. During the wedding ceremony, the husband and wife presented gifts to the gods. They also shared gifts with each other and with the bride's father. It was critical to provide a gift to the bride's father, especially if he was a prominent person and maybe a foreign ally in the coming days. Number 11. Mummification. The ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife. Mummification, according to their beliefs, assisted someone in reaching the afterlife. This is why the process of mummification took so long and why pharaohs began building their tombs during their lifetimes. The ancient Egyptians believed that the body of the dead was a sacred vessel that needed to be preserved for the soul to journey to the afterlife. They developed a meticulous technique of mummification which involved many intricate steps and took up to 70 days. First, they washed and purified the body of the deceased. Then they removed the brain through the nose and the internal organs through a cut on the side. They stored these organs in special jars or wrapped them in linen and placed them back inside the body. Then, they dried out the body with a salt called natron, which prevented decay and bacteria. After that, they cleaned and oiled the body to protect the skin. They wrapped the body in layers of linen bandages, each one carefully applied and adorned with protective charms and amulets. Then they sealed the bandages with resin or gum to keep the body intact during its journey to the afterlife. The principal embalmer was a priest who wore an Anubis mask. Anubis was the dead's jackal-headed god. Priests used Anubis masks because he was linked with mummification and embalming. Priests performed special religious procedures at the tomb's entrance as part of the funeral. The ceremony's most crucial element was known as the opening of the mouth. A priest used a unique tool to open specific areas of the mummy to the sensations enjoyed in life and required in the afterlife. The deceased individual might now speak and eat by touching the gadget to his or her mouth. He was finally prepared to embark on his voyage to the afterlife. The mummy was placed in his or her coffins in the burial room, and the entrance was sealed. Such elaborate burial practices might suggest that the Egyptians were preoccupied with thoughts of death. On the contrary, they began early to make plans for their death because of their great love of life. They could think of no life better than the present, and they wanted to be sure it would continue after death. But why preserve the body? The Egyptians thought that the mummified body housed this soul or spirit. If the body is destroyed, the spirit may perish. The concept of spirit was complicated, involving three spirits, the Ka, Ba, and Akth. The Ka, a double of the individual, would stay in the tomb and would require the sacrifices and objects. The Ba, or soul, was free to leave and return to the grave, and it was the Akh, which could be interpreted as spirit, who had to travel through the underworld to the final judgment and entry into the afterlife. All three were crucial to the Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians also had a dark and mysterious side to their culture. Some historians and archaeologists have argued that they practiced human sacrifice in some form, especially in the early dynastic period. They point to the evidence of servant tombs in the burial complexes of early pharaohs, which contain the remains of individuals who seem to have been buried at the same time as the ruler. Some scholars suggest that these people were ritually killed to serve and accompany the pharaoh in the next world. However, this theory is not widely accepted, as there are other possible explanations for these burials, such as voluntary suicide or natural death. Moreover, evidence from later periods of ancient Egyptian history does not support the idea of widespread human sacrifice. Most religious texts and myths that mention sacrificial rituals or actions are likely to be symbolic or metaphorical, rather than direct descriptions of actual events. Number 10. Ancient Egyptian medicine. Ancient Egyptian medicine was a fascinating mix of science, magic, and religion. Healers and doctors of this era had great knowledge and skills, and their treatment methods often included complex rituals and various medicinal ingredients. Among these were parts of the human body, a practice that seems gruesome and horrifying to modern people. However, to understand the cultural context of this practice, it is necessary to explore the reasons behind it. Ancient Egyptian healers believed that the human body had powerful healing properties. They used parts of the human body, such as hair, nails, blood, bones, or flesh, as ingredients for potions, ointments, or amulets. They believed that these parts could transfer their life force or essence to the patient, curing them of their ailments or protecting them from harm. They also believed in sympathetic magic, an idea that was common in many ancient cultures. It was thought that fragments of the bodies of deceased people, especially those who possessed special qualities or abilities during their lifetime, could transmit these properties to the living. For this reason, various human tissues, bones, and fluids were widely used for treatment. For example, skull fragments or bone powder were considered effective for treating headaches. Human fat was used to prepare balms and ointments for wound healing and skin conditions. Mummies, believed to be a powerful source of healing energy, were ground into powder and used as an ingredient in medicines for various ailments. While today, the use of human body parts in medicine may seem horrifying to us, ancient Egyptians sincerely believed in its effectiveness. At the time, people had a limited understanding of human anatomy and diseases, so they sought to cure illnesses using the means and skills available to them. Number 9. The Nile River. Imagine living in a land where the fate of your crops, your livelihood, and your civilization depended on the whims of a mighty river. A river that could bring life or death, abundance or famine, depending on its mood. A river that was revered as a god, worshipped as a source of all blessings, and feared as a force of destruction. This was the reality for the ancient Egyptians who lived along the banks of the Nile River for thousands of years. The Nile was more than just a body of water for the ancient Egyptians. It was their life force, their culture, their economy, and their religion. It shaped their history and their identity as a civilization. The Nile influenced various aspects of ancient Egyptian life, from agriculture and trade to spirituality and health. Periodically, the Nile would swell and overflow its banks, covering the land with a thick layer of dark, rich silt. This silt was like a miracle for the farmers, who eagerly awaited the arrival of the floodwaters that would nourish their fields and make them fertile for the next harvest. The Nile enabled the cultivation of various crops, including wheat, barley, and flax, which were essential for food, clothing, and other purposes. Agriculture was the foundation of the Egyptian economy, and the predictable cycle of floods allowed farmers to develop advanced agricultural technologies that supported a prosperous and stable civilization. The Nile also served as the main transportation route for ancient Egypt, facilitating the efficient movement of goods and people along its length. The river connected various settlements and cities, promoting trade, communication, and cultural exchange. Boats made from wooden planks or papyrus facilitated the transportation of everything from raw materials like stone and wood to finished products such as food, textiles, and pottery. The Nile also enabled contact with other civilizations, such as Nubia, Kush, and Mesopotamia, opening up new opportunities for trade and diplomacy. Another aspect of the Nile's influence was its religious and spiritual significance. The ancient Egyptians considered the Nile a gift from the gods, especially the god Hapi, who was associated with the annual floods. The river was seen as a manifestation of the divine, which is why numerous rituals, festivals, and ceremonies were centered around the Nile and its annual inundation. The Nile also inspired many myths and legends about its origin and its role in creation. For example, one myth tells how the god Osiris was killed by his brother Set, and his body parts were scattered along the Nile. His wife Isis collected his remains and reassembled them with the help of the river's magic. Number 8. Dental care. While the Nile was a source of many benefits for the ancient Egyptians, it also posed some challenges to their health and well-being. One of these challenges was dental care. The ancient Egyptians had an advanced understanding of oral hygiene and dental care for their time, but they also faced many dental problems due to their diet and environment. The main causes of dental problems in ancient Egypt were the consumption of a carbohydrate-rich diet, including bread and beer, as well as the presence of grit in food. All these factors resulted in a high incidence of dental decay, gum disease, and tooth wear among the population. To address these problems, ancient Egyptian dentists employed a variety of methods and tools to alleviate pain and treat dental diseases. Textual evidence from the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, the two most extensive medical texts of ancient Egypt, describe various dental procedures and remedies. These include the use of honey and natural herbs for their antimicrobial properties, tooth extraction, and treatment of dental abscesses. Archaeological finds such as bronze forceps and bone or ivory toothpicks further attest to the existence of dental treatment practices in ancient Egypt. In addition to treating dental diseases, ancient Egyptians also practiced preventive measures to maintain oral health. The use of chewing sticks, frayed at one end and serving as improvised toothbrushes, was a common practice, and the use of natron, a naturally occurring mineral salt, was also used as a tooth cleaning powder, serving as an early version of toothpaste. Number 7. Retainer sacrifice. Many slaves were buried alive with their lords in ancient Egypt in a cruel ritual known as retainer sacrifice. This practice was founded on the concept that the hereafter was a continuation of terrestrial life, and that the deceased required the company of their loyal servants and, in certain cases, their pets on their trip. Retainer sacrifices were most popular in Egypt during the early dynastic period, around 3100 to 2680 BCE, and subsequently declined as society matured. They were usually used in the graves of high-ranking people like pharaohs and other dignitaries. Many human skeletons have been found in burials from this period, indicating the widespread practice of retainer sacrifices. Usually, the sacrificed servants were killed using poison or other methods that minimized visible damage to their bodies, as preserving physical appearances was important for the afterlife. But over time, ancient Egyptians began to change their approach to this ritual. Now, instead of servants, small figurines known as ushabti were placed in the tombs. These figures, carved from stone, wood, or faience, were intended as magical substitutes for the deceased's servants. They were inscribed with spells that allowed them to come to life in the afterlife and perform tasks and work for the deceased. Number 6. Curses. In ancient Egypt, curses were not just words of anger or frustration. They were powerful tools of magic that could influence the fate of individuals or communities. Curses were used for various purposes: to protect oneself or others from evil forces, to weaken or defeat an enemy during warfare, or to maintain social order by punishing transgressors. Curses were performed by priests, magicians, or even ordinary people, indicating a widespread belief in their power. The cursing process involved the creation of material images of the supposed targets, usually in the form of clay or wax figurines, pottery shards, or papyrus scrolls with inscriptions. These items bore the names or likenesses of enemies and evil forces, often accompanied by magical spells and incantations. These items were then destroyed. They were broken, stabbed, burned, or buried. Such actions symbolized the destruction of adversaries and the removal of their harmful intentions. Execution texts, being inscriptions where the names of intended targets were recorded, provide invaluable insight into the political, social, and religious landscape of ancient Egypt. They reveal people's concerns and fears, as well as indicating alliances and conflicts that shaped the region. Number 5. Ancestor veneration. Today, it would sound bizarre to have a chat with your great-grandfather who died centuries ago. This was the norm for the ancient Egyptians, who believed that their ancestors continued to exist in a parallel world and needed their care and attention. The cult of the dead, as it is often called, was a central element of ancient Egyptian society, underscoring the close connection between the living and the deceased. The ancient Egyptians performed various rituals, offerings, and memorial ceremonies to ensure the well-being of their departed family members and to maintain harmonious relations between the realms of the living and the dead. Tombs and temples were the main venues for these rituals, serving as a tangible link between the two worlds. These structures were not only the final resting place for the body, but also served as a place where the living could communicate with their ancestors and pay them homage. Beautifully decorated with scenes from daily life, religious motifs, and images of the afterlife, these tombs provided the deceased with a connection to the world they had left behind. Number 4. Dwarfs often held important positions in royal courts and in the families of pharaohs. They served as craftsmen, jewelers, dancers, and performers, and were highly valued for their skills and talents. For instance, the famous dwarf Seneb under Pharaoh Khufu held the prestigious title of Chief of Dwarfs and was immortalized in a beautifully executed statue alongside his wife and children. Artistic depictions of dwarfs in tomb paintings, statues, and other ancient Egyptian artworks often show them engaged in various activities, such as participating in religious rituals, crafts, or entertainment. These images reveal that dwarfs were considered an integral part of society, often receiving respect and admiration. The high status of dwarfs in ancient Egyptian society can also be explained by their symbolic identification with certain gods and divine qualities. It was believed that dwarves were under the protection of the gods Bees and Ptah, who were portrayed with facial features resembling those of dwarfs. Bees in particular was a god associated with protection, childbirth, and the home, further enhancing the significance and reverence for dwarfs. Number 2. Amulets. What if you could use magic to influence your fate or that of others? What if you could wear a small object that could protect you from harm or bring you good luck? This was possible for the ancient Egyptians, who believed in the power of magic and its ability to protect, heal, and bring about beneficial changes. Magic permeated all aspects of everyday life, from medicine and religion to personal relationships and politics. Central to this belief was the use of amulets, which were thought to harness magical energy to influence the physical and spiritual realms. Amulets were small, often intricately decorated objects made from various materials such as stone, clay, metal, or glass. They were worn on the body or placed in tombs or temples as a means of protection or enhancement. They often bore symbols or inscriptions representing gods, animals, or other concepts related to magic. For example, an amulet shaped like an eye was meant to ward off evil or enhance vision. An amulet shaped like an ankh was meant to confer life or health. An amulet shaped like a scarab was meant to symbolize rebirth or transformation. Amulets were not only used by individuals, but also by groups or communities for collective purposes such as ensuring victory in war or preventing famine. Number 1. Dreams, messages from the gods. The ancient Egyptians believed dreams were messages from the gods, revealing secrets of the future or warning of dangers. They paid close attention to their dreams and sought their interpretations. Dreams were a means of communication between the gods and people, often providing valuable information, prophecies, or warnings about the future. Therefore, the interpretation of dreams became a vitally important skill required by people from all strata of society, including pharaohs, priests, and ordinary people. Qualified dream interpreters analyze the symbols and images of dreams, providing guidance and advice based on their interpretations. In ancient Egypt, people who had strong and important dreams were lucky and special. People wanted to hear from the gods through dreaming, so they made themselves dream on purpose. Egyptians would go to holy places and sleep on special beds, hoping to get advice, comfort, or healing from the gods. The oldest book about dreams that we have found is from ancient Egypt. It is now in a museum in England. This shows how much the ancient Egyptians valued their dreams. There is a statue of a lion with a human head in Egypt called the Sphinx. Between its front legs, there is a stone that tells how a man fixed the Sphinx because of a dream. He dreamed that if he fixed the Sphinx, he would become a king. Many ancient Egyptian texts, like the Chester Beatty Papyrus, contain records of dreams and their interpretations, offering valuable information about prevailing beliefs and societal issues. These texts illustrate a wide range of topics that were thought to be related to dreams. These include health, relationships, politics, and religious life. For example, one dream recorded in the papyrus tells of a man who dreamed that he was bitten by a crocodile and then healed by a priest. The interpreter explained that this meant that he would suffer from an illness, but recover with the help of a god. In addition to dreams, the ancient Egyptians also attached great importance to various omens and supernatural signs. The movement of celestial bodies, unusual weather conditions, or the behavior of animals were often viewed as signs of divine will or upcoming events. These omens were carefully studied and interpreted by priests and other knowledgeable individuals who made decisions on matters such as agriculture, warfare, and religious rituals. For instance, the appearance of a comet was considered a sign of impending disaster or chaos, while the flight of birds was seen as an indication of good or bad fortune.